in light of these kind of findings, how do we get to where the heparin shortage occurred this time? And what were the things that sort of maybe led to that, and how would we manage that sort of current shortfall?
Well, I think sometimes they're multifactorial. I said sometimes there's a delay or the manufacturing practices. Like, for instance, one company, Pfizer, manufactured heparin in Puerto Rico. And so when Hurricane Maria hit, there was a shortage and a delay as the plant, came on board. But about 80% of the porcine heparin in the U.S. is manufactured in China. And as you mentioned before, the outbreak of African swine fever has led to many swine both naturally dying, and then as a preventative measure, the Chinese government has called a large number of hogs that are related to the production of heparin. So there's some estimates that 25 to 35% of all the pork mucosal intestine available for production of heparin in China will be lost secondary to this outbreak. Also, prospectively, the Chinese government is actually culling the hog production secondary to the prevention, especially in the northeast regions of China. So that in total, I think they estimate more than 150 million animals will be euthanized or lost secondary to this deadly disease.
Quite a devastating thing, not only obviously for the animals, but for the production of this, and does highlight for us how dependent we are sometimes on these products that are coming from animals on sort of environment, natural disaster, disease states where it might affect us. In the cath lab where we were using the heparin, we often check the ACT and think about ways to know that we're getting the effect we want, but these shortages hit us pretty quickly, I think, and so in clinical practice in the hospital or in other parts of our care, are there, in your opinion, opportunities with some of the DOACs, such as Betrixaban and or Rivaroxaban, to change the treatment landscape? Because those agents have now been at least approved for medically ill population, and there could be an overlap here. So what are your thoughts about that?
Sure. One of the largest uses of heparin in the hospitals for venous thromboembolism prophylaxis. So I think as the shortages come and the institutions are notified, you move your response in kind of a serial way. So the first response is that you can notify people of the shortage, so you can try and switch. So you mentioned in the cath lab. So for instance, you could use bivalirudin more, even though like 10 years ago it was like, don't use bivalirudin.
Yeah, right.
The pharmacy department would tell you, use heparin, but now it's more, okay, use more bivalirudin and less heparin, because you want to restrict the heparin use for important things, like for cardiopulmonary bypass or ECMO or places where it's critically ill. So when you have a high number of, I'll say, units of use being in venous thromboembolism prophylaxis, you can look for alternatives in that scenario as well, and you're correct that Rivaroxaban and its new approval could be one of those agents. There is also a move to switch use to enoxaparin. So if you used unfractionated heparin for venous thromboembolism prophylaxis, you could use enoxaparin. But not yet listed on the website for the FDA, but it is listed on the ASHP website, is that enoxaparin is certainly also under shortage. So I think one of the responses is that you saw as the heparin became under shortage, the institution switched to enoxaparin under shortage, which will then create an enoxaparin shortage. So it's kind of a moving target as practitioners switch.
Yeah, so a lot like we've discussed. One is knowing about a shortage. The second is trying to prevent or at least think about other agents. And in this case, at least in the hospital where, as you said, and in our cardiovascular practice it's true too, there are many places where we have to have heparin. There's really not a lot of other things we're used to doing. Cardiopulmonary bypass is a classic example, and that's something that urgently might need to be done.